All right, thank you everybody for coming back. We're going to get started. The next item on the agenda is the board discussion of the 2020 draft RIPA report. So I'd like to open it up to the board members to discuss the contents of the report and continue the conversation we had earlier in response to Kevin's presentation. Oh, actually, can we approve the minutes before we lose quorum from this? Okay, so can someone make a motion for approval of the September 26, 2019 meeting minutes?
So moved.
Can you say your name?
Douglas Oden seconds that motion.
Okay. All right.
We'll call for a vote on that real quick. Can we call for a vote on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you.
Okay. All right, so now we can get into the discussion.
Oh, can I offer some thoughts? So, hi, Steve Raphael. First of all, I just wanted to say that, you guys did a great job, and the analysis was expertly done, and the writing was quite clear. I just had a few thoughts on maybe where to go with the veil of darkness analysis and what to include in this report. And I'm new on the board, so if I say something incorrect in terms of the intention of the report, feel free to ignore what I'm about to say. But it does seem to me that one of the purposes that the report may serve is it can provide a roadmap for departments that are then going to do their own analysis of the data that will be made publicly available, and that at the agency level, the results might provide things that are actionable, right, both for the community and for the police to understand what it is they're doing. So I do think it's important that the report sort of clearly outline what the empirical strategies are and what the tests are and what they mean. So I appreciated that comment, and I think the current draft does that. When it discusses the hit rate analysis, discusses the reason for it and how one would interpret the result, or when it discusses the veil of darkness, the theoretical motivation and the interpretation is there. And so I do think that what we're doing in this is we're kind of providing sort of a how-to guide, and then each department will do its own theme and variations. With respect to the veil of darkness, I've always had some problems with that paper, and I think the way I try to think about it is, imagine an African American man driving home from work, and driving home in the light and driving home in the dark, and simply driving from work, not doing anything wrong. And can we come up with stories or alternative theories where the darkness itself might lead to suspicion on the part of a citizen that calls the police, or on the part of a police officer that is patrolling a specific neighborhood? And I can come up with a lot of stories, right? And so for that reason, I've always thought I'm not sure how to interpret that. So for example, there's several published studies that show that with daylight savings time and the loss of light, there's an increase in crime. And so we know there's at least one thing that's changing with that might alter the behavior of police officers, and it might interact with race in a complex way. And then also I wonder, department by department, a lot of our cities are very segregated, and it could be that just because the light isn't there doesn't mean, one does not know who they're stopping, right? And I think that's something that should be thought through and at least listed. And then just and then a final thought. It all seems to me that the appropriateness of the test can vary quite a bit depending on the agency. So I would think CHP, that is stopping a lot of people on highways, and where it might be a little harder to sort of profile based on where the stop is occurring, and they're not responding to so many calls for service, that it might be a good test for CHP, and they might learn something by thinking through the veil of darkness carefully. But in other departments, that might not be true. So then my only other comment, and this is not technical, but so I wasn't on the board last year, but in the previous reports, it had mentioned that there'd be a hit rate analysis, there'd be some attempt to compare people to baseline, and then there'd be a veil of darkness analysis. And so I almost read that as sort of a pre-commitment that, this is what's going to happen next year, and let's see what happens, and that the research team was tasked with doing that. And I do think both for signaling to departments as to what's the correct thing to do, and as well as just kind of being consistent with what the plan was, that it does seem like one wants to present the results from all these analyses, and it's up to us to interpret what they mean, but then make some judgment call as to whether or not using hit rates or using the veil of darkness is the right thing for an agency that wanted to go in greater depth in their own data to do or not. Those are my thoughts.
Could I comment? This is Oscar Bobro. I think I've said this at the subcommittee meetings and conveyed it to other board members, but I don't know why we're doing the veil of darkness, and I would be of the mindset and ask this board to delete it. And I've said that at the subcommittee meetings. In none of the discussions we had on putting regulations together for collection of data, did this ever come up? Or is it in the statute itself? And I think the confusion in regard to the different interpretations that have been outlined already speaks volumes as to why it's unnecessary. We're supposed to collect data about who's being stopped, and there's not a single mention in the considerations and limitations of the veil of darkness paragraph about spotlights on patrol cars. I've never seen a stop in my practice where we get videos of stops, or on the street where I've seen stops occur, that isn't lit up lighter than daylight by the spotlights that are on the side of police cars when stops are made. And the fact that that's not mentioned in the considerations of veil of darkness, that there's a reference to ambient light. Stops are made under conditions where the officer is trained to be able to see. And so to say that veil of darkness either excuses or doesn't excuse certain behavior or is important to the data that we're assigned to collect, I think is wrong, and I think we should take it out of the report. I have a number of other comments on other issues in the report, but I think we should have a discussion about this issue.
Dave Robinson, Kings County Sheriff. So I like the veil of darkness. It just gives us another piece of the puzzle. We could talk about variables in every one of these data sets, and it was brought up at the last meeting, officer demographics. There's so many different data sets that can be included in every single one of these, and different variables that can be included in every single one of these. I think under the veil of darkness, if we were to see the same chart and you saw a 90%, 10%, it would be one of those where we looked at and said, man, we've got to really get that agency and see what's going on there. These charts are supposed to be for the agencies to kind of give them an idea of what they need to look at internally within their agencies to make some adjustments in training and protocols and procedures and policies. And if we start taking charts out because they look like they don't mean anything, well, that might be to one person but not to another. And so I think the veil of darkness does say something, because we don't make traffic stops with our spotlights on. That's after the stop is made. So it is dark. Did they have tinted windows? There's so many variables that go into this. I think it does mean something, and I would recommend that we keep it in there, because this isn't about what one agency might like and what agency might not like. This is supposed to be about, we're going to give all the information out, And the data analysis out there, they can pick it apart however they see fit, but agencies are supposed to be able to look at this and try to get an idea of what it can do or not do for them. So my recommendation would be to leave it in.
Andrea Guerrero from Alliance San Diego. I think there are significant concerns above and beyond the first two analyses. There are significant concerns with the veil of darkness methodology. And I'll just go back to the inclusion of CHP. You know, CHP makes up 57% of the overall stops, but 67% of the traffic stops. In the case of San Diego PD, where I live, there are more stops based on reasonable suspicion than there are based on traffic. So I think if we're going to provide analyses, they have to be meaningful and they have to have some integrity. In the case of veil of darkness, the concerns outweigh the possible benefits. The board has never taken a decision to affirmatively include veil of darkness, and we have talked about the other two analyses. There is no perfect analysis. We're waiting for the magical unicorn researcher to come up with the best contextual analysis, but I think veil of darkness is just too problematic, and in the scale of cost to benefit in terms of meaning, actionability, and interpretation, it doesn't stand up to the test.
Commissioner Warren Stanley here, just one comment about the veil or darkness that I have some issues with. Somebody's made a lot of traffic stops working the road. When you make a traffic stop, you see a vehicle going down the freeway for us. We're behind that vehicle. I have no idea who's driving it, whether it's daytime or nighttime, because of the headrest or whatever the case may be, or it's an SUV. I know the vehicle's speeding. I know it made an unsafe lane change, maybe made unsafe turning movement, or it has expired registration. Most times, until we stop the car, get out of our vehicle, and start to approach the vehicle, then we know who's sitting behind the wheel. Man, woman, African American, Caucasian, Hispanic, Asian, no matter what the case is, that's when we know, and that's daytime or nighttime. And so that's one of my concerns with that. My other concern has to do with the SWITRS data. Just a couple of things about the SWITRS data. There are a number of police departments in the state that don't investigate property damage collisions. So that data, that collision and that data doesn't get entered into the system. So that data is eliminated. There are a number of police departments in the state, when they investigate collisions, they don't determine who's at fault. So if you're, and that's one of the things they're talking about, using not at fault versus at fault. And then if you're going to use the not at fault party, then you eliminated that other party, so you eliminated another portion of the data. So those are my concerns with those two things.
Yeah, Ed Medrano from DOJ. I want to echo that. In terms of the police departments that are taking property damage only reports, that's actually increasing. So the problem's actually going to get worse because more and more agencies are not taking property damage only collisions. And as you know, indicated in the report itself, is there's really no empirical study that this type of data is really going to be helpful. And you know, as we're looking at the veil of darkness and we're looking at SWITRS data, I think from a perspective of how that's really going to help us and police agencies, we need to consider whether that's going to be valuable or not, or either of them should be included.
Yes, this is Douglas. So in looking at the veil of darkness, I think it's a tool that can be used for an analysis. And since this is just the first report that actually includes the veil of darkness, I think we may have to see over time whether or not if there are significant statistical differences between stops at night and during the day. So
I'm not ready to throw it out. I think it's just a work in progress, and then let's see how the data comes along as the more people, more police agencies come on board, and more time elapses to see what these results actually mean. There's always going to be some discrepancies in the data based on how it's collected. But I look at it as it's just more of a tool to see if there, because I think the big picture is to try to ascertain whether or not there are stops based on perceived race or identity. And if this is another tool to determine that, I should take a look at it. If it seems to be untrustworthy, I think we can eliminate it at a later time once we have more data in.
If I could add to the conversation, yeah, I don't think it stands up to the integrity test right now, and for the context that we are interpreting it in, the traffic stop data is skewed, and 67% of it is going to come from CHP. CHP, which just told us, the CHP commissioner just told us that it's not meaningful in the context of highway stops because you can't see who's in the car. So this is not going to be meaningful data, and we give it outsized influence in the report. We give the residential analysis roughly a page of conversation. We give the traffic collision data roughly 1 page of analysis, and we give the veil of darkness about 5 pages of analysis, and within that analysis we have contradictory information. So this is not something that the board ever affirmatively said that we should do. I think rather than erring on inclusion of something that's going to potentially confuse the public or create a sense of meaningful data when we've just described that it may not be, I think we should leave it out, and we should err on the side of caution until we have a better handle on how it can be used in a meaningful way if we arrive to that point in another year.
And I would ask the DOJ weigh in. I mean, where in the regulations that we're statutory obligated to follow, does it say anything about inclusion of the time of day that the stop was made and an analysis of the veil of darkness issue? It never came up when we were putting the regulations together, as far as I can recall, and it's not in the statute. So I agree with the comments that were just made to give it 5 pages of time in the report itself, in light of the problems with the analysis. I think I would agree that we should take it out, and maybe we should have a vote on that.
This is David Swing from Morgan Hill. I'd like to weigh in while DOJ is looking at the regs. It looks like my understanding of the regs is that it doesn't articulate any type of context to be, or recommended context to be used, something that our board has discussed over the last year or so. So I think that the regs and the legislation is silent on that to any type of methodology. Since we're looking at a 6-month, or our first report that includes data, and it's 6 months worth of data from only 8 agencies, the Wave 1 agencies, I'm a proponent of inclusion. We've talked about veil of darkness throughout our meetings over the last year or so. There's no perfect methodology. The ACS data, based on population and census data, there are so many other factors that influence officers' actions that are outside of the realm of population data. For example, you can have a jurisdiction that's a job center or a retail center, or so many other factors there. So we can't look for the perfect solution, because in this case, I think I've heard it said before that perfect is a nemesis of good, and that we will never find a perfect solution. So again, I'm a proponent of inclusion, and I think we should include all the methodologies that are here in the report as a way to help us evaluate and decide on a path forward for future years.
And again, I don't think it helps. I mean, as been pointed out, it's too vague in regard to its conclusions. It's contradictory. It doesn't help, and it's not consistent with what our mission is. Our mission is supposed to be to provide the statistical data on who's being stopped and searched in the state of California, and not what time of day it is. And so, again, I don't think it belongs in the report.
Yeah, I'd also like to echo the comments by Board Member Guerrero and Bobro. I think also, I know this comment has been made before and I raised it earlier, but if we're looking at these 8-wave agencies, they're for the most part urban areas. Just knowing what Los Angeles looks like, there are certain clusters of Los Angeles where police congregate far more than other parts. And so I think that this, regardless of who they can see, there are neighborhoods that are demographically usually people of color, and so I would agree that I think this methodology is flawed. I also think with respect to the population data, one of the comments that Professor Glover made at the last meeting and also in her written comments was that the way we assess arrest rates is also based on populations. So the data that we're looking at in terms of stop rates is consistent with other ways that we evaluate criminal justice data, whereas I think that this veil of darkness method seems a little bit odd and very skewed, and I'd be in agreement with the other board members that I just mentioned.
I'd like just to move us forward, if I can, by suggesting, and I'd like to make a motion based upon this disagreement, that for the purposes of this report that's about to come out, that we not include that data, that this question be referred to the Stop Data Subcommittee, and anybody can come and show up at that meeting and dive deeper and see if the methodology can be improved or some of these concerns can be addressed. Because otherwise, I don't know that I have a super strong opinion on it one way or the other, but it makes me uncomfortable given the level of discomfort of many of the board members, comments in the ACLU and others on real questions about the methodology. I think if some of those were addressed, we might be in a different place, but given where we're at now and this report is about to come out, I would just suggest that we move on with the business by pulling it out for this one. But I totally hear what Dave and others are saying, is that it may be of great value, and we don't just pick the data that we like because we like what it shows or we don't like, but they sound like they're serious methodological questions, and I think we have a Stop Data Subcommittee that is well positioned to take a deeper dive on it. So I would make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Additional discussion? Additional discussion?
Yeah, go ahead. Additional discussion?
Two points to that. The Stop Data Committee has reviewed this, and we've talked about it in our committee. I don't know if it took a formal vote, but it has been a topic of conversation as the co-chair of that committee. So it has been there already. And then also, and probably more importantly, the Stop Data requirements asks for officers to identify date, time, and duration of stop. And so why are we collecting time of stop if we're not using that information in our assessment of the analysis and of the data? So why are we even collecting time if we're not going to look at time as a factor in the analysis?
If I can just clarify what I was suggesting, is not that we don't want, that we're not making a decision, or my motion is not saying we're never going to report veil of darkness data. My motion is suggesting that there's a lot of clearly controversy about it, controversy among the board, comments from the public, and I think a deeper dive needs to be taken specifically, and my memory of the conversations in the Stop Data Committee, I don't know that, at least I was aware of these detailed methodological problems or concerns. So I'm not suggesting that we never report this, but that for the purpose of the report that's about to come out, we pull it until there can be a deeper dive and see if we can address some of these methodological concerns. We may not be able to. We may not be able to address all of them. I'm not prepared to vote to keep it out forever and never to collect this information. But I think given the level of discomfort with it, we can put a pause on it for now. And we can always release interim reports. I hope we do during the year as other issues are elevated. Frankly, I think these mammoth 90-page reports are not that helpful. And that actually exposing some important and significant findings over the course of the year may actually attract more attention and more conversation.
Excuse me, Board Member Raphael.
Yeah, Steve Raphael. I guess the thoughts that I have about the results as they currently stand is that, the results present, I think the reason why it takes 5 pages is because it's complex and subtle. Not necessarily because it's more important. You know, the hit rate analysis and the benchmarks that we see are really straightforward and easy to interpret, where this is a little harder. That being said, I think among the research community, I don't know if it would be the go-to tool, but it does have a research base. I mean, there's a Journal of American Statistical Association article that's published and well cited, and there are researchers that are very active in this space that use it along with others. So, you know, I don't have the kind of immediate negative reaction that some of the people on the board are having. But that being said, we do have 2 tests that are motivated by this that are giving us conflicting findings. And so I don't know if we can draw anything from the analysis that's presented other than say we did it 2 ways and we got things that don't line up with one another. And with, you know, and at the same time, with that in mind, maybe we do need some sort of interim report that's methodologically focused, that's you know, sort of a how-to for departments that says these are the ways you can investigate you know, racial bias or profiling or identity profiling with your department's data. This is, you know, our take on this particular method, and it might be something independent of the report. And, you know, our take might be, we went down that path, we specified a couple of well thought out tests, they generated conflicting, you know, results, and so we don't have a lot of faith. Or it could be that after some more time and thought that these things can be reconciled with one another and we can suggest something of use. But it does feel a little bit half-baked at the moment to put into a report for
I have a comment.
This is Doug Oden. In looking at the report, it does, I think on page 24, it indicates that there's a considerations of limitations of the Veil of Darkness report, where they point out some of the limitations of the analysis. I think if there are more points to be made regarding the analysis, that could be included in this report. I think people have raised some very valid points as to why this analysis even shouldn't be addressed at all. Perhaps those points could be included in the report to point out that this is not the all-inclusive analysis, that there are limitations, but this is just a snapshot based on what the statistics show. So I'm not quite ready to throw out the baby with the bathwater at this time, but I think you can add some more limitations to this report, which would put it more in context and may give the reader a reason not to put that much emphasis on it because of the limitations.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ed Medrano. I guess my comments are sort of summarizing all of them. I think that if we don't put that we at least looked at some of the different approaches, not drawing any conclusions, I think people who read this report are like, well, what are they comparing this to? None of them, like you said, somebody said they're half-baked, but at least we gave an attempt to do some kind of a comparison against some different approaches, whether it be Switter data, whether it be Veil of Darkness, those kind of things. That there's not enough information, we haven't drawn conclusions, but at least in the report, maybe just in a couple pages, say we looked at a couple different approaches, inconclusive at this time, which will hopefully be addressed in future reports or intermittent reports.
Thank you. I'd like to add a comment as well. The original data sets that we all approved included date and time, and so I think we do a disservice to the report if we don't include some kind of analysis to that date and time. I agree. On page 24, it does have a pretty good explanation, and maybe that can be expanded to explain a little more. I wouldn't even be opposed to that explanation being at the front of that context, so that way people had to read that first before they got to the Veil of Darkness analysis. But I do think that we as a board committed to analyzing date and time, and that was part of our process from the very beginning, was to make sure we included date and time, and I think we do a disservice by taking it out.
And if I could add, we do, in the supplemental appendix, we do analyze date and time by agency. Every hour of the day, we list out the percentage of people who are being stopped. So that is here. We do have that duty, and it is fulfilled. The concern about veil of darkness, I think, is a much deeper one, and I think we as a board have a responsibility to provide clear and meaningful analysis, and we cannot do that for the veil of darkness analysis at this juncture. And I would wholeheartedly support a supplemental report mid-year that looks at that approach specifically, but given the concerns, the methodological concerns, as well as the clear data skewing that's going on with 67% of CHP constituting this data and CHP itself saying that that is not meaningful, it would be irresponsible at this juncture to move forward with this analysis and present it to the public when we are not clear what it means.
Commissioner Stanley, I'm not saying it's not meaningful. I'm just saying you have to look at it in its context of how traffic stops are made.
Absolutely, and the context matters, and I think there are more questions than answers on this particular analysis. Why the rush to put it in now?
I move to call the question.
Allison, you had a comment? Oh, I'm sorry. I saw you look down, and I thought maybe you had a comment.
I was trying to see who just spoke.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the table to remove the veil of darkness section from this initial report for this year.
Just one more comment. It seems to remove it entirely, given that there was discussion of it in the last report. Seems I mean, shouldn't there be some discussion of how this is going to be addressed in the future in the report, even if the results are not there? I mean, maybe that that it's not ready, or the results are sufficiently ambiguous that it's hard to conclude anything from them, and maybe include a tab of the race distribution over the hours, but without interpretation.
Sheriff, if I could clarify, in response to Member Barbaro's question, there is no requirement in the statute or the regulations on any specific methodology that needs to be utilized by the board. The statute does prescribe certain components that have to go into the report, which is what you find in that appendix. But it has to be disaggregated for each category per agency. The way that the veil of darkness test came up was discussion in subcommittees and then discussion through the board as a possible methodology, and I believe that even in last year's report, it was still suggested as a possible methodology with the pros and cons, as well as the yield rates, and there may have been some other methodologies that were discussed and put forth. So that is how the genesis of that methodology came about.
Okay, I will take a friendly amendment from Steve Raphael, whose expertise is tremendous, to my original motion. So now I would have three parts of my motion. Part one, not include this as written in this January report. Two, include per Stephen's suggestion, a reference and a comment that this analysis is undergoing and methodology is being examined, more to come. Three, refer this to the Stop Data Committee, or if that committee doesn't want to take it up, to another committee that really wants to do a deep dive on the methodology, with the intent of seeing whether this can be, some of the concerns of the other board members can be addressed. That be the thrust of it. So those are my three, that's my three-part motion, and I'm hoping we can vote on it.
Second. So I think, just for process, will you officially withdraw your other motion then, since we have a new second on this one?
Sure.
Okay. And so any additional discussion on the new motion on the table then?
Does that also include the Twitter data as basically the same points?
I think we're going to take that one up separately.
Okay, sorry.
Just for clarity. Okay, I don't see any additional discussion or comments.
A non-board member make a comment.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No? Okay.
They're fine.
We'll go ahead and, I think it'll be easiest if we do a roll call vote on this one. If somebody from DOJ could do that for us, I'd appreciate it.
Yes. Aisha, you're up.
First member, Steve Raphael.
Aye.
Oscar.
Aye.
Tim Samard.
Aye.
Dave Robinson.
No.
Sahar Durali.
Aye.
Doug Oden.
No.
And Andrea Guerrero.
Aye.
And Luanda Hawkins.
No.
And Warren Stanley.
No.
And David Swing.
No.
And Ed Medrano. Edward.
Oh. I abstain.
Thank you.
For the record, could we have a readout of what the tally was?
5 ayes, 5 noes, and 1 abstention.
Oh, my God.
I'm glad we made that easy.
Oh, my Lord.
So I think we might need to table that for some direction from DOJ, or I don't know how that works, to be honest with you.
The motion doesn't carry.
The motion does
There's
not
no
carry.
majority.
Okay, very good. So I think, I know there was some additional discussion from the board on the draft report, including the Switters, if somebody has additional comments on that.
Can I, before we move on from that, can we at least, I think it was you that suggested this, Sheriff Robinson, put the information that qualifies the veil of darkness at the beginning of the section, and it includes some more of this discussion about other factors? Are folks in agreement with that at least? Do I need to do a motion on that? Okay.
I see a lot of head nodding, so I think unless somebody speaks up to oppose it, I think that'd be fine.
Does anyone, let me make this, does anyone oppose it? To just rearrange the section a little? Okay, can we do that then?
Yes.
Before we move on to the Switters, I want to ask whether, because Board Member Guerrero has raised several times this question about trying to disaggregate the traffic stops with CHP data, which I think has relevance across the board for all of the data in this report. So I'd love, and it also has relevance, for the veil of darkness as well as the Switters. So I'm wondering if we could take a moment and discuss that, and maybe hear from DOJ what's possible within the time frame that we have left in terms of disaggregating.
I think it might be nice to hear from DOJ on that specific topic, just to see what that would entail if it was possible to pull CHP kind of out, since they are, the largest agency and the largest data.
Kevin?
Well, I also just want to ask a question of Andrea Guerrero. Is your suggestion that CHP data all be pulled out, or that all traffic data from the Phase 1 reporting agencies be disaggregated from non-traffic stops?
No, my suggestion is that we disaggregate CBP so that we have, as we do the aggregate results, the CBP results, and the other Wave 1 agencies. Because of the amount of CHP data, it's 1 million data points out of 1.8 million, that's 57%. That is going to skew every single chart we have. So it may be that they're in line with everybody else, but I can see in the appendices that they're far off. It's pretty night and day. And it would be meaningful for the public to understand the data with that disaggregation.
Is that just for this report? Because as we add on the
Yeah.
additional law enforcement agencies moving forward, that they may not be as outliers as they are now.
Well, going forward, the data will grow and they will be a smaller percentage. But right now, they're 57%, and that's huge, right? So I would say, at least for this year, that we disaggregate them so that we can get a better understanding of what's going on in the other 7 Wave 1 agencies. I think that will be actionable information, meaningful information for both law enforcement agencies and the public.
And I have an additional question on that. And so is it in the report, Kevin, will it all be pulled out by agency as well? Or is it, how will that look? What's the goal?
So the analyses that are in the statistical report, it's basically two sections, right? There's an overall section, section 1, and there's a section 2 that goes over a lot of the information that we provide. So it goes over the residential population information in comparison to the stop data, the SWITR's population information in comparison to the stop data, the veil of darkness tests for each agency, as well as the yield rates for each agency, and I believe also the enforcement rates for each agency. So it goes over all that information, looking at each agency's data separately from all other agencies. And so that's included in the statistical report in its current form. Although I could be wrong, we may still be in the process of adding the enforcement rate by agency information. Oh, no, it's in there. All right, never mind. That's in there currently.
That's not before us, correct?
I'm sorry?
We don't see that before us, correct?
That was one of the documents that was sent out.
It's not in our folders, though? I don't see it in my folder, so.
Oh, okay. It's a long document, so.
Okay.
I don't know what was printed out for you all.
Just to clarify, what you're saying is that, for example, in this, thank you, in this technical report, we'll be able to see, for example, CHP stops by ethnicity compared to the contextual information that is provided in the aggregate in the report. At this point, we have 3 analyses, 3 contextual pieces. We have residential population, we have traffic accidents, and then we have veil of darkness. So, but we only have that at comparing the aggregate data. So what you're saying is, in this report, which was placed before me, we'll see each of these Wave 1 agencies with those contextual pieces. So for example, San Diego Police Department's stops by ethnicity will be compared with the residents who live in San Diego. We'll see that.
So yeah, so what you're talking about, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm realizing that we've still got typo in the headers for that table, but we'll fix that. But yeah, what you're referring to, that example, so San Diego Police Department's stop distribution in comparison to the residential population of the city of San Francisco, sorry, it's not San Francisco, San Diego, that's in section 2 of the technical report. That's table 1.7. And so there you look at only the San Diego Police Department, so that's on page 169. For you to take a look there, it's at the bottom of the page. So yeah, that table exists in the document in its current form, albeit with a typo that says 2018 where it should say 2017 in the title. But
Thank you.
That's continued for VOD stuff as well as yield rates, et cetera.
So Kevin, can you disaggregate the CHP data?
It is disaggregate. You're saying it already is in this technical report.
So yeah, you can,
Okay.
yeah, it's in the technical report. There's tables that look at CHP's data independent of all other agencies and
Okay.
compare
And
it to, for
So the
instance,
significant graphic could be made and put into this report as opposed to being in a 169-page technical report?
so if we wanted a specific analysis that's included in the main report to just look at CHP and include it in the main report, we could just create it based on what we have in the technical report and move it over.
So you've already
We're
done.
interested in the other ones without CHP.
Oh, and the ones without CHP? So
Yeah.
there are some of those already that exist within here as well. My understanding, and try it if I'm wrong on this, I think we've broken out the yield rate analyses with, this is what it looks like overall, including CHP. There's another table that will break out, this is what it looks like when we exclude CHP. So it's all agencies without CHP, and that version is in the yield rate section of the technical report already, but we don't have that for, like, say, the population estimate information or the SWITR's information as of
I'm
yet.
just looking at the charts in the report current draft. Would it be possible and reasonable for you guys, in time for this report to go out, there aren't that many, what, figure 11, I forget how many charts you've made, about 11 it looks like, to have a companion chart next to each of those, which is the same question addressed without the CHP data.
We could produce that information. The only question there is that where there are differences between what you look at overall, that then would beg the question of us also delving into what those differences are, which would require a lot more writing surrounding it. So the creation of those graphics, not so much an issue, very easy. The resulting questions that would come by looking at those side by side and us having to explain, okay, in this version of the all data version, you see this, basically what we have in there, and now we're having to do a whole nother separate section, not section, but explanation for a second set of graphics or analyses. So it would, theoretically, it might double the size of some of these sections.
My suggestion would be to just simply add another column in the chart that you have in the main report that includes CBP, or rather 2 columns, CBP, the other 7 agencies, and then the aggregate. And then you can refer in the main report to the technical report, which I didn't see a reference there, so I didn't look anywhere else. That way, if somebody wants to go deeper, they'll know where to go. But I think your analysis can remain. You're not adding pages. It's the same chart. You've already done the work. You're just providing the public with the disaggregate of CHP and the other agencies, the CHP plus 7 as one column, and then the aggregate. If we don't do this, we are providing the public with information that could potentially be skewed based on what I see in the appendix, and expecting them to go into the secondary document, technical report. We've already done the work. It wouldn't be much to add in the columns. I would strongly recommend that we add that in to help the public consume this information.
So just so I'm clear, add in the graphics or in the tables in the report, add a supplemental document next to each, or sorry, not graphic or column if it's a table that would look at the data, but without CHP's data, and just include that in there, but without changing the discussion surrounding those graphics and tables.
Except
and
to
then,
add a
and then
reference
referring to
yes, the technical
report stating
Correct.
that we break it up by agency in section 2 of the technical report.
That's right.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that wouldn't require as much work as re-explaining everything for the whole separate set of analyses. So, okay. I don't know what the procedure is to make that happen, but that's doable.
That's doable? Great.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, I think as long as anybody else, members don't have any additional comments, or it seems like that's reasonable. So as long as Kevin says, yeah, that's doable, then I know we're cutting down on the time frame left to make big changes, but it sounds like that's a smaller change. So, in talking additionally about the draft report, I know that the commissioner had made a comment about SWITRs. I would like to bring up just further discussion on SWITRs and kind of pick his brain a little bit based on some of the comments that were said. Commissioner, if you could maybe just talk to what your thoughts are on keeping the SWITRs data in the report or not in the report based on your, I don't honestly know much about SWITRs, so I can't pretend to speak to it.
Well, like I said, with SWITRs, with property damage collisions, there are, like I said, a number of police departments in the state that don't investigate those. So that's part of the driving population that will not be added to those SWITRs stats. And then you would compare them to the stop data and all that stuff. So there's that issue. And then there are some police departments take the accident or the collision, but they don't determine fault. So that skews the stats. So I think you have to take all those things into consideration if you're going to stick with using the SWITRs data. I think you have to point those things out so that people are clear on that, because it's not going to be all-inclusive. And I think, Ed, you had some other comments about that?
Yeah, my only other comment is that number just continues to grow in terms of the agencies that are not taking property damage reports. And also, some agencies now are using a private vendor to take property damage reports, which we don't have access to that data.
And just for clarity, a property damage report from sheriff's deputy, non-SWITRs guy, that's a
Could be a traffic collision where there's just no injury?
No injuries, yeah, just,
Okay.
I hate to use this term, but your basic fender bender.
Because I think some of us were looking at that like somebody ran into somebody's
Yeah,
fence.
that's what I thought.
But it could literally be two cars crashing into each other and nobody got hurt.
And nobody got hurt.
And
Or it could be
agencies are
somebody-
no longer
Yes,
taking reports on those or at least finding fault on those.
yeah, both.
Now, is CHP still, they do,
We do,
you guys do?
yeah. We still investigate property damage only collisions.
Because that would make a big difference if, like, a San Diego PD, for example, decided they weren't going to find fault or weren't going to take
Weren't
those
gonna take
reports
it, yeah.
anymore.
Well, a good example would be the second highest contributor to the report, which would be Los Angeles Police Department, does not take property damage only reports.
Very good. Thank you.
And I'm sorry for my ignorance about it. How is this important in the context of racial identity profile?
So we heard in a meeting, I'm not sure if you were there, Tim, we heard from a researcher who shared some of the research data on it's not ideal data, but the value of this data is that it's random data, so to speak, because it's, the problem with the residential data is that you have so much mobility in the region that, say, for example, in San Diego City, you have people from all over the county who are driving through in the middle of the day. And so when you use the resident population, you're not accounting for that. Well, accident data would ostensibly be more neutral. So having one and the other helps understand the context for the profiling. And I would say that if we're going to leave the veil of darkness in, then we should absolutely leave this in. And if we want to dig deeper on the value of these methodologies going forward, then let's do that. But in light of our past discussion on the former item, I would say the same would hold true here, that we should proceed with this data set and see where it takes us.
You took the words out of my mouth, Board Member Guerrero. That's exactly what I was going to say.
I have a quick question on the Switters data. Was that data compared to the 8 agencies' data? And did all 8 agencies of those, or did all of those 8 agencies, do they report to Switters? Do we know?
So within the Switters data set, there are ORI numbers, which are just basically agency-level numeric identifiers in the data set that let us know which collisions were reported by which agencies. There were values for each of the ORI numbers associated with each of the Wave 1 agencies, and we also narrowed down what cases we included to those where the party, it's kind of technical, but there's a party file where there is a variable in there that is an indicator for whether or not the party was determined to be at fault or not. And so we only looked at cases where they indicated that the party was not determined to be at fault. And so the only ones that made it into this are ones where those conditions were met. It was submitted by a Wave 1 agency. The party that we're looking at, the race or ethnicity of, was a party where the agency indicated that they were not at fault for the accident. And so because they have values for those, they were included. So they were both included for these agencies.
So if LAPD doesn't find fault or take those, then we might miss a lot of data, if I'm understanding that correctly.
If they were not to, yes. But what we included were cases where they did. But we do not know cases where they did not.
Do we have a breakdown by agency on what Switters data came from which agencies?
Yes. Well, we have in the technical report, let me find the page numbers in the technical report, but actually, no, it's in the table of contents. It starts on page 172 of the technical report. There's a breakdown for each agency that compares their stop distribution to the number of individuals that were involved in traffic collisions that they reported in Switters that were not at fault by agency's data. So yes, that information is already included in the technical report.
In the technical report.
Yes.
I think as Zahar mentioned, we left the other one in. Probably the best course is to leave this one in, subject to all the limitations that we've already talked about, that this is still being developed, and all of these are just different approaches that we're looking at.
Yeah.
Would be my recommendation.
One thing that I got a note card, and one thing that we were wondering is, given the significant disagreement with the board, especially on the Veil of Darkness, is 5-5, can we include something in report regarding this disagreement? If this is the board's report, I think that's a pretty significant split. So could we talk in that explanatory paragraph, include a paragraph or two about the disagreement and the various objections that were made to this methodology, as well as the reasons for support of it? Is that something board members are in agreement with? Yes. Sure. Okay.
That's a good idea.
All right.
Yeah, I really like that idea, and I would like that in the context of Switters as well. I know we didn't actually take a vote on Switters, but I think just the explanation to me, who's been in law enforcement for 25 years, I didn't know some of those things about Switters and property damage, could be 2 vehicles, et cetera. And so I think, I would also like to ask that some of those comments also make it into the consideration section, if they're not already in there, for the Switters section.
So not to get too bogged down in details, but I think the distinction is that would be in factors to consider regarding the Switters data, whereas here what we're asking is if we can specifically note the significant disagreement on the board regarding Veil of Darkness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Also related to Veil of Darkness, there was a part of that motion was to refer it back to the Stop Data Committee for further review and analysis. I'm certainly, as a co-chair, certainly open to that suggestion and willing to look at this in the next year. So just as that could be included, in my opinion, in that statement.
Sure. Any disagreement on that? Okay. Well, I think.
So I had raised during the break some suggestions. This report is quite long, and I'd like to explore ways to forefront and draw the attention of our audience, be they in law enforcement, the public, the media, elected officials, etc. And what I would like to suggest is a couple things. One, that the executive summary be moved up to the front, so it's the first thing people see. You can put this list of additional contributors and editors and our names somewhere else. And that goes to my second point, that I think a lot of this could be put into appendices or attachments or whatnot. I think we need to make this much more user-friendly. I think all of the methodology issues, for the most part, should go there, but I think the chairs probably would have to engage with DOJ in figuring out how to simplify and restructure this. But I think, for me, given this is the first report where we actually have data, right? And despite inadequacies in it, despite whatever controversies we're having over methodology and what to include, I'm excited that after more than 3 years on this board, we actually have data. So I would love to have right at the front some, as I think members of the public suggested, some clear charts and graphs that are most interesting and significant, and draw some conclusions. I would refer you guys to look at a recent racial disparity report that PPIC produced. This is a state agency. It's different than PPIC, but it's much more user-friendly in terms of saying right up front, before you get into how the report was done or whatnot, here's what we found. Here's some interesting things. Here's what's significant. I don't think we are nearly at the point to be able to say, and here are the board's recommendations to law enforcement or city councils or the state legislature based upon those. But I think we can at least really elevate what we found interesting. And I will say that, I found some interesting things reading through the report, that aren't even in the first half of it. So for instance, starting on, I don't know what it is, well into the 50s, page 55, Dave and I were looking at these numbers on civilian complaints. Almost bizarre disparities in the number of complaints, let alone profiling allegations, right? Entire San Diego County Sheriff's Department, 9 complaints received. Flip one page, Oakland Police Department, 1,396. So, I would leave it to, the chairs, and obviously we're going to have the phone call thing on the 10th, right? We will have another chance to look at this, and people can say, well, you missed this, you missed that. But overall, if there's a way just to have an executive summary right at the front with charts and graphs that says, great, we have data, here's some of the really interesting things in this data. And then I think overall, where verbiage and methodology and stuff can be put in footnotes or appendices, because there will still be interesting discussion and data that you can't possibly include in a short report. So I think a lot of this other stuff could be attached or appendiced or whatnot.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and that's a comment I made at the, and I know the DOJ is working on something like that, but that's a comment I made at the last meeting, is to create a snapshot document, and to the extent possible, bringing down the reading level. So it's, 8th grade reading level. That's the materials that we put out to the community at my organization are always 8th grade reading level, and so if we want it to be digestible by a broad swath of the community, I think we need a shorter snapshot that is more accessible. And I know you guys are working on that, so, but I would echo the comments of Member Solar.
Yeah, I echo those recommendations. I have additional recommendations if it's appropriate to bring those forward.
Yeah.
I think the document would be strengthened by making clear recommendations. These could be part of the executive summary. Recommendations to the legislature, recommendations to law enforcement, and recommendations to the community. We have them peppered throughout, but it would be good to bring them to the fore and make it clear. So, to the legislature, we have clear recommendation around legislation that clarifies the complaint issue. We have a funding recommendation to the legislature for implementation of RIPA. So bring that forward. To law enforcement, we have language in there about, how to use the data, to encouraging them to analyze the data for themselves and take action, encouraging them to align their policies with the recommended policy language we have and complaint language as well, right? So pulling that to the fore. And then for the community, recommendations on how they can use this data, how to make it actionable, how they could engage with law enforcement to look at potential changes to policies or to the complaint system as stakeholders in good governance, right? I think that would be very helpful.
I think that's a great idea. So then we could have the charts and graphs, right, with clear description of what they imply as the executive summary, and then followed by, if I hear what you're saying, literally like bullet points, right? Because they're to pull them out of the body of the report and just say, here's a list of recommendations to the legislature, to law enforcement, to the community.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're saying recommendations, are you talking about some of the best practices that we have outlined for?
No, there are like 2 or 3 points for each of those bodies.
Okay.
That we could summarize. They're detailed in the report, but we could summarize what those are as I described. I think that would be helpful for everyone to understand what they are, what they can do with the information, because we've said repeatedly we want this information to be actionable, and this is some guidance on how it is actionable.
Excuse me, I agree with those recommendations. I would also add or request a more specific recommendation, and that is, there is a comparison in the report, page 17, of the stop distribution with residential, or sorry, with demographics or the population data in the state. There is no comparison, similar comparison in regard to search data. And so you have stop data and comparison to population in the state, but you don't have, based on racial demographics, but you don't have, and gender demographics, but you don't have that comparison based on search data. And I think that we should have that comparison in the report.
This is Doug Oden. I just have a clarification regarding the recommendations. Are you indicating that the recommendations are already contained in this report and that they just need to be highlighted, or do we have to create the recommendations? And if so, how can we do that and have it reviewed and voted upon in time to get the report out?
The recommendations that I'm referring to are already in the report or have been discussed. For example, I'll be specific, for the legislature, in the report, it includes recommendation for funding for the implementation of RIPA. And it includes a recommendation for the, for fixing in state law the complaint requirements.
Right.
I can't remember if there's also something about funding for post, but if there is, then that's included, right? That's for the legislature. For law enforcement, there's language in there about reviewing their policies and aligning them with the model language for anti-bias policies, and also for the complaint process. There might be more things. That's what I'm remembering right now. And then for the community, it's about, and we sort of sprinkle this through, you know, how the community can use this information to then engage with law enforcement to improve policies, training, accountability. I mean, these things don't have to be, I mean, this whole thing is probably less than half a page, but it's just very clearly calling it out so that a legislature isn't like, okay, so what am I supposed to do with this report? You all say you have recommendations, they're buried in here, help me, right? Let's just pull them up to the front into the executive summary.
I wanted to follow up on Oscar's recommendation. Is that something that DOJ can, are those numbers you can run quickly?
I have a question regarding that. Is it in terms of the searches in total, or the ones that have discretionary or not? Because there's a couple different ones. I wasn't sure which one you were referring to. The hit ratio or discretionary, non-discretionary?
I was looking at the search chart on page 25, figure 7. That I believe is of all the information received regarding searches, and if you compare that to the information on page 17 and the chart that I think preceded it, where that table comes from, but that compared all of the stop data based on residential population distribution, and what I was asking for was a similar comparison to the same residential information with the search data.
So just for the aggregate, not for the lower and higher discretion?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Can you do that?
I'm a little bit unclear on the ask, but so
you have
sorry.
You have search frequency by race and ethnicity.
Right.
That's statewide, right?
So that's, yeah, well, that is for all the Wave 1 agencies that collected information during the...
And you have stop data, similar data. What I'm saying is you made that comparison in the stop data to the residential population of the state based on, you know, what the percentage of those populations are, what percentage they make up. Can't you do the same comparison with the search data?
Can I, Oscar, what you're asking for maybe is on that add one column?
Yeah.
Where it's this racial breakdown of stops where someone's searched.
Okay, and the distribution that would fall in each race, ethnicity, Steve, would be the percentage of searched persons, right? So treating all searched persons as the category, as the denominator, and then each race, ethnicity. I mean, we could do that. I haven't seen people do that before in research because generally speaking, when you look at searches, you're talking about searches only occur of people who are stopped, and so you generally think about them in terms of the people who were stopped, who was searched, rather than of everyone that resides in a given area. You have to be stopped in order to be searched, or be in a consensual encounter with a law enforcement officer that does result in search. We do have 2.2% of our cases that are that type of situation, but generally speaking, people think about searches in terms of the denominator being stopped individuals rather than all people who reside in a certain area. So we could do that. I don't think that there's much precedence for doing something like that, but I mean, it's doable.
Perhaps could that be something that's done, and then for our December 9th meeting, we can take a look at as a board? I think that one's via teleconference.
Yeah,
I think I have seen similar, I hear what you're saying, right? Obviously, the natural inclination when you ask the data question is, okay, of the people stopped, what were the racial disparities in searches? But I think I have seen studies done, Steve or others would know better than I do, but that also look at other pain points of racial disparity in the system based upon population, right? So we look at disparities in prison sentences based upon population demographics in the city of San Francisco, right? Not just on how many people got convicted, right? So it's all of interest, but I think there is some precedent for looking at these pain points that we have, stop, search, arrest, and comparing them both to whatever was the population of people who were even eligible to make it to the next step, but also to the total population either within the state of California or within a given jurisdiction.
Okay, so since it was
Wait, Kevin,
mentioned.
can I just, it sounds, I'm going to throw Dr. Raphael under the bus right now. It sounds like you understand what the ask is. Dr. Raphael, would you be able to work with
Yeah.
with DOJ and help
sure.
assist in that?
But I think just to be clear that I understand it. So it's just, if we take the number of people searched as the denominator and just the percent of those people that are white, black, going through the categories. And so rather than using the 1.8 million, we'd use the 300,000 or whatever it is where there's searches and just the race distribution. And then we can see if searches, there's more disproportionality or less relative to the resident population. But yeah, I can.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Thank you.
And this is LaWanda. I have a question regarding the weight residential population distribution. I would like to know on that side where you have 11% or 13%, what percentage of that are stopped? The people are stopped based on that percentage. Is there any way? Can you tell me where I can go look for that information?
Yeah.
That's in the same tape?
That's on page, no, this is based on 1,800,000. Yeah, that's based on the stops, but of the 11.9%, how many people were stopped based on this 11.9? Because that figure will be totally different.
So, yeah, I mean, one could do that, right? So if you took 11.9% of 39 million, that would be how many people are self-identifying as Asian in the census, and then 5.5% times the total observation of stops, and take the ratio, and that's the numbers, the percent stop.
I don't think so. That would not be.
So you could just do them.
Well, I mean, you could use the data to get that. But I think the way, when I look at these numbers, is if you have the number on the left less than the number on the right, then you're being stopped at a rate that is less than your representation in the population. And on the other hand, if the number on the left is greater than the number on the right, then you're being stopped at a rate that's greater than your number in the population. And so, or another way one could do it is take the percent stopped, and it would show the same thing, but it would just be a slightly different way of presenting the data.
So can we, as a board, defer these questions to the expertise of Steve and Kevin to figure out, and we'll see what they come up with on December 9th?
Yeah, we'd be happy to work with Steve.
Are there any other items that the board members would like to discuss prior to opening it up to public comment?
Yes. Under the complaint data section, which begins at page 49, I have two suggestions. One is the section opens up with the number of complaints, 16,000 complaints, then says that roughly 15,000 or 95% are non-criminal. And that, but then goes on to say that a certain number are, over 1,000 are based on profiling of one kind or another. And so it presumes that those numbers are not part of the non-criminal complaint. So we have more complaints that are based on profiling than we have that are called criminal complaints. And we have to remember that profiling is actually illegal under Penal Code 13519.4. So we should not set it up that way. Either drop that language around criminality or non-criminality, or recognize in that paragraph that, putting aside profiling, regardless of whether it's criminal or non-criminal, it just renders moot and toothless the complaints that are about profiling, and it doesn't make sense. Like in the section on policies, it starts out strong. Profiling is illegal. It's can be subject to penalty under the Penal Code. And then 2 sections later, in complaint data, we're talking about complaints based on profiling and not describing them as potentially criminal in nature. So that's a problem. That should be cleaned up. The other thing that we should do is front load in that section the limitations on the complaints process and system, right? Because we sort of bury the point, which is that our complaint process is lacking. We need to do a lot. The report does a great job. Your committee has done a great job in identifying what the limitations are and room for improvement in the complaint system, but it's buried, right? So the first thing I see is that, there are only 9 complaints in San Diego at the Sheriff's Department. When I know that doesn't reflect the state of affairs in that county, especially given the headlines over the last couple of weeks, which talk about the wide-scale problems in the agency. So that point gets lost, and we need to front-load what those limitations are to make sure that people understand that we've got a long way to go in the complaints. And in fact, I would say in the conclusion, which hasn't been written yet, there are a few things that we need to punctuate or underline, and maybe this is true in the executive summary as well. One is obviously the data has been collected. That's awesome. We're well on our way. This is a big moment. But 2, that the data tells us something pretty clearly, that the profiling of Black Californians is significant. That's only mentioned once slightly. We should, that is a major finding in this report, if you ask me. And then, we've made some progress around policies, although we have a number of Wave 1 agencies falling short. And in the complaint data, this is the largest room in my mind for growth, the greatest opportunity to really make headway. But in order to do that, we need to improve the complaint system, and we need the legislature's help to create the legal framework in order to do that. So the complaint data section was great. I loved it. I just think it needs to be reordered. I think we need to front load these concerns and clarify this language around, what's a criminal versus a non-criminal complaint, because if we're telling the public we're taking this seriously, and yet we're identifying the profiling complaints as non-criminal, essentially, then we're rendering moot the previous section on policies, which is trying to build confidence that, the state of California is taking this seriously.
Yeah.
I agree with all of that, and thank you for it. And I'd also like to suggest that there be language in the complaint section, because I agree that's an area ripe for progress. And some of these disparities are just bizarre, right? Oakland Police Department with 731 officers had almost 1,400 complaints versus, as you mentioned, the San Diego Sheriff's Department with far more officers and 9 total complaints. So I think I'm on the complaint committee, And I think now we have some really interesting questions to ask about, if we take some of those stark differences, certainly what is going on in Oakland versus San Diego, or some of these other, big differences, both around total number of complaints and profiling allegations. And really, I think we need to do a deep dive to understand what's being done differently in those places.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'd be happy to help the DOJ reorganize that section accordingly. But I will say, I do think we addressed this. This is like a recurring topic at every single subcommittee meeting, is the fact that there's zero uniformity in terms of policies. There's not even clarity as to what constitutes a complaint. Every agency does it differently, and I thought there actually was a ton of detail about that. So is there something missing, so we can know what you think is missing in terms of explaining what's different at the agencies?
I'd have to go back and look at the various detail, and you're right, there is incredible inconsistency.
Yes.
But I also think I suspect there may be some nuance that, depending upon, I would like to know more about, in comparing some of those big differences, what kind of, and we have it, but we sort of have it across the board. So I think we could posit some potential reasons for the big disparities that are maybe the biggest drivers, and then go a little deeper for some information, discussions with stakeholders in those localities.
Yeah.
So, is there an independent agency? We've talked about, right? Are the materials translated? Is it anonymous? The various things that we think will lend themselves to encouraging more complaints.
Yeah.
And maybe out of that, we could then have a set of more concrete recommendations at some point to say, okay, here are truly best practices in jurisdictions that, both in terms of soliciting complaints, and then we've talked about the speed of getting back to people and resolving them, et cetera. So I think we're getting there, but I think we could do a really nice job on it this year.
Do you mind if I just respond? Because I think that what you're asking for, and I think that it makes sense, is to do a deeper survey, because I think the survey that we did on page 75 is broader, and I think you're asking questions that are more granular. So I think that is a great thing to do for next year's report, and I would be in agreement to do that deeper survey, but I'm just not sure that level can be included in this report.
Oh, no, not
Yeah,
this.
okay, got it.
And I just want to point out that you're right, a lot of those things were discussed in the subcommittee, and I know that we have a lot of volume of paperwork in front of us today, but when you look through pages 61 through like 79, there's even like 3 pages of best practice recommendations that we discussed at subcommittee meetings that I think will outline a lot of those issues. So I do think that as we reconvene as a subcommittee, we could take a look at those and then try to draw from your comments to move forward. But there is a ton of information in the complaint section this year, and so I think we have built on it a lot, and it does also identify some of the major issues in California with what we reviewed, so.
Are there any other comments? Just to give people context of timing, we have 1:45 set for public comment, and it's 1:41. Are there any other board comments? I don't know that we're going to have a ton of public comment, so we might be able to stretch out our conversation further.
I had a comment on that last topic. I sent an email to Allison Elgard on the language of a letter that was supposed to be sent on behalf of DOJ about the, and we had a discussion about this the last time. Sorry. We had a discussion about this the last time about the Ninth Circuit and the California Supreme Court being in conflict, and there was a draft of a letter, and so I made some changes to that and sent it to Allison, but I was told I should bring it up at this proceeding, and so I'm not sure. I mean, it's kind of lawyerly nonsense, but it's, in my opinion, it's important that the letter should read differently, and if it's okay, maybe Allison can distribute what I sent, but I didn't see the letter that we had. Oh, here it is. Was that in the packet? Okay. So what I think that it needs to have language that says that despite the fact that the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution requires that federal court rulings be preeminent and regulate such conflict, be a lead-in line to the conflict that exists, and requesting that the statute be amended so that it does reflect the federal court decision rather than California Supreme Court upholding what is inconsistent with the federal court, because federal court rules, basically. So I'm going to ask that this be distributed to the board members and so for consideration in regard to the letter that's sent to, I believe it's Senator Weber.
Is that the only change?
Yeah.
I personally think that seems fine, and you're just adding factual information to contextualize the reality that the letter points out is that there's just confusion. You're pointing out that there is some legal clarity, but that doesn't change the fact that law enforcement agencies still seem to be confused, and city attorneys and whatnot, and we need Senator Weber's help to change the law.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so everybody should have that letter today in your packet, and what I'd like to do is just add that to the December 9th agenda, if everybody could take another look at that, because it was adjusted, changed. Sahar and I both took a look at it, and there was some changes that were made to that, and I think that might capture what exactly you're talking about, because it does talk about the conflict between the two, and it makes some recommendations. I only had an additional word change on that, but I'll be happy to send that to Nancy. It's just instead of telling them what they should do with it, it was more of deleting or amending the section versus just deleting it altogether. I think that's something the legislature has to figure out, not us. But if everybody could take a look at that and then provide any feedback to Nancy, then Sahar and I can work together to kind of hopefully come up with a final draft for the December 9th meeting that could then go out. Sahar can't be actually making a decision on it, but she can at least look at it, I think.
Okay.
So if everybody will do that on that letter, I think we're really close, and I think it does capture a lot of what you just mentioned in the letter that's in the packet today. So when you have time, take a look at that one.
Anything else? So it looks like we're definitely going to have the December 9th meeting. Okay. All right. So public comment.
Hello again. Good afternoon. Ava Bitron from the ACLU of California. Just one or two quick notes on the Veil of Darkness point. I was very glad to hear that there will be an attempt to disaggregate out the CHP data. I look forward to hearing what the board thinks, if that disaggregated data is present in the December 9th, in the draft before the December 9th, I wonder if that will kind of spark a different conversation about the outcome and the results of that data. I look forward to hearing the board's opinion on that point. I wonder, one of the recommendations that I personally really agreed with is pulling out data visualizations where possible, and I wonder whether that might be possible for the daylight savings piece within the Veil of Darkness analysis, which I didn't see, but maybe I overlooked a data visualization for that piece as opposed to just the time slots. I also wanted to sort of reiterate the call for disaggregation across the board of individual agencies where possible. I think this for a couple of reasons. This is the first report with data, and there are only 8 agencies, and that's not going to be the case moving forward, right? So this is really an opportunity to do some of that digging down into the specific agency level data. I would make that call even more strongly for agencies that have not already ex ante committed to analyzing their own data. I know that in my region in the Inland Empire, we don't have that commitment yet from the 2 sheriffs departments, whereas I know that some, like San Diego, for example, have made the commitment to analyze the data themselves. So I think analysis from the Department of Justice is even more important in cases where it seems like that kind of disaggregated information won't be present, and where the technical appendix, while important, doesn't really answer the questions. I don't know if the technical appendix is also available for the public. I haven't seen a copy of it, but just makes it a little bit difficult to provide comment on that piece of it, but I understand that that's kind of the nature of the beast. I hope once more that the comments that we put forth in our letter about a couple of tweaks and modifications to the stop outcomes and hit rate analysis will be taken into consideration. I think that analysis, we really think it's very strong and in excellent shape, but there's a couple of categories, including the discretion question, that I think are really important to properly giving a picture of what the data shows. And then again, just once more, reiterate a call for really strong legibility and pulling out recommendations, not just of the visual analyses, but also of the level of reading comprehension, so that this can be a useful tool for advocates and community. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide comment and for the draft report.
Hi there, Katie Matthews with Disability Rights California. I am disappointed that the Veil of Darkness is going to remain in the report. Still, I do like the fact that it's going to be considered at the beginning of that section. I do think that if you read it, it might be helpful to the reader to actually bring it in or put it into bullet points or something, so that because it basically reads as a set of objections to what you're about to present. Specifically, when it comes to the second to last sentence where it talks about how the VOD is also a test best fit for vehicle stop data, that's an opportunity to point out that you are pulling out the CHP data at that point. So I just wanted to alert you to that. I also think I would like to thank you for disseminating the ACLU's great letter. Specifically, I would also think it would be great to include the references that they make in their first paragraph on the Veil of Darkness and their objections to it. I think it's really helpful for readers to actually have the referrals to specific publications that discuss the issues with the methodology. I also think it might be helpful, this is a very basic recommendation, when it comes to the considerations and limitations of the VOD, to actually bolden it, highlight it, maybe have like a structure around it for that, and also any other kind of considerations or limitations that you're making. The ACLU also brought this up in their letter, and we agree is, I know that there's a lot of data already being presented in January, but definitely down the line, if not sooner, if it's still possible to do more intersectional analyses. I think that would be really helpful. And then finally, I think it's really important to get the technical report out to the public. I know it's really lengthy, but it would be really helpful to look at that before December 9th, so that, that stakeholders have a chance to look at that data and see what's actually included and what isn't. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Michelle Wittig from the Santa Monica Coalition for Reform. I'd like to make a suggestion maybe for a future report on the section of best practices. It occurs to me that we're sort of on a collision course between a flawed policy and a promising policy that is not very widely implemented. The flawed policy has to do with the investigation of citizen complaints. I'm not a lawyer, but my personal experience has taught me that the legal context in California is not very helpful to the citizen who files a complaint. There are very great restrictions on what the citizen can be told at the end of the complaint process. So the promising practice is what you might call public safety mediation. This is a practice that has been instituted by the Los Angeles Police Department in collaboration with a group of mediators. In its best implementation, public safety mediation is a component of a complaint investigation. Unfortunately, the implementation in Los Angeles seems to be public safety mediation instead of a legal investigation. That's not a good pairing. One should not have to choose between a deep investigation and a mediation. So while on the one hand I'm very supportive of the idea of public safety mediation, even that promising practice can be done poorly, and unfortunately sometimes is. So I would love to see mediation be a component of the investigation of civilian complaints, but not as an alternative to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just make a suggestion? Do we have a process, so we have at this meeting, for instance, we just heard several recommendations. We have a letter from the ACLU with a number of recommendations that I think are really interesting. By what process do we sort of agendize the written or verbal recommendations that we hear at these meetings for further conversation?
So you are free to discuss them. I know you haven't had a chance to look at the ACLU letter, and I apologize, we didn't have it. I don't have the agenda for the December 9th meeting, but there's generally in every agenda a place to discuss what items you would like to include in the report. So I would just suggest bring the items that you specifically want to see, and then they can be discussed and included in the sections.
And then, Nancy, I'll just add, so and then obviously in looking at the minutes from the past meeting, if somebody sees something in the minutes from a public comment, a board member can simply just bring that up at the next meeting as a discussion item.
Right, and the other thing that I would also recommend is that I think maybe even a better way of doing it as well is to just send those to Allison, Aisha, and Anna, and we can compile everybody's suggested additions in a list and include them the way we did with the comments that were submitted by the public last time, and then forward them to the board as a whole when we send out all the paperwork.
Okay, well, I would like to suggest a couple things. One, that the last comments, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Michelle, thank you, Michelle. That those suggestions be referred to the complaint subcommittee, right? It's a process recommendation around handling of complaints, so we can take that up there. And that the ACLU's detailed letter, many of these I think are really interesting. The intersectional analysis, the police unit functioning, duration of stop, et cetera, that I don't know, and I'm not insisting that they be discussed at December 9th, because we may have a full agenda and just try to get through the report that will be in front of us at that time. But if they can't be discussed on December 9th, I would request that these be discussed at the next meeting.
Could we also make a request to perhaps if we have a subcommittee meeting first, those go to the subcommittee that they might fall under?
Even better. Even better.
So, since we're not planning on having any subcommittee meetings between now and the 9th, because there's just no time, perhaps the board could just make general motions to work with the co-chairs of each subcommittee to include any comments in drafts between now and the time that we send out the next report. Because the meeting is, it's set for the 9th, which is a Monday, I would anticipate that we would try to get something to the board by the 5th or the 6th on the redrafts. And so if we could have any comments by the 3rd.
Very good. Now, I apologize, Nancy. I meant to say that if we weren't able to get them in by this next one, that a future subcommittee meeting.
Correct.
Because obviously this is an ongoing process.
And I'm assuming, and I probably shouldn't, that we may not have time to run the data points suggested by the ACLU between now and December 9th, such as the intersectional analysis, data by police unit functioning and assignments, duration of stop, et cetera. But if DOJ feels that they have the time to run additional data.
I think probably at this point in time, just the asks of the board are going to be a heavy enough lift, but that certainly those types of things, like you said, can be considered. I think there's varying things, correct? Because some points of the ACLU letter speak to concerns that they have about the veil of darkness or other methodologies, and then there's other points to talk about running different types of analyses. So some of those can make it into this year's report. Some of them can be sort of put in the, we hope to in the future discuss these at subcommittee meetings.
Yeah, I'm less concerned about, well, definitely the veil of darkness people already suggested, including some of that, but I thought some of these suggestions for other ways to run the data, and I think Dave's suggestion that they go to the appropriate committee and then be discussed at the next full board meeting, whenever that is, February, March.
Correct, thank you.
Right, but the report's due before then. So, I mean, in the interest of time, in having taken just a few minutes to read the ACLU's Veil of Darkness analysis, I'm going to move that we agree to include this in the report, or at least reference it and have it in a, you know, in the back of the report somewhere, where when we have a discussion of the Veil of Darkness, and we all have agreed that there was going to be some notation about the dissension in the board regarding whether or not to have it in the report at all, that we maybe have a footnote that says that that refers the reader to the ACLU's take on the Veil of Darkness and the limitations of it. So can we agree to do that now?
I think, to be fair to the board and even the board members that aren't here that haven't had an opportunity to look at it, it might be unfair to try to add that additionally, especially with all the discussion that we had on that and the motion and the second and the votes. I think, in all fairness for the process, that should be something that we literally take up, you know, moving into next year and add it as a priority on our list, would be my opinion on that.
Can I make maybe a compromise suggestion that, because I assume, you know, the chairs are working with the staff in terms of the next iteration of the report, and so it was clearly the board's interest to have some explanation on the VOD controversy, right? And so you might take a look at the ACLU and whether you reference that specifically or use some of that to better explain the issues around the VOD, and then we can come back, and so maybe there's just a way to make everybody satisfied with a description of some concerns raised about VOD.
I like that suggestion. I just want to point out there was a lot of suggestions today, and there's a lot of movement of this final report going into 2020, and as all of us up here have day jobs, you know, the more that we add in to try to get in with the Thanksgiving holiday coming up is going to be a big challenge if we keep just putting more on for that December 9th agenda. So, but I like that suggestion. I think we can easily both take a look at that and with DOJ and include any overall comments that might lend to what the overall discussion was.
I have a list, I'll email you, of 25 further suggestions for work by the co-chairs specifically.
I have Doug Oden. I have a quick suggestion for the board. Perhaps that we could, after the public comment, that there could be a section for the board to comment on the public comment, because they make excellent suggestions, and if we just move on, they say, well, yeah, we said it, but that's it. So if some board members have some comments based on the public comment, I think there should be maybe a period of time where the board can comment on the public comment.
I'm in agreement with that.
Very good. I think with the discussion, the recent discussion, we've kind of gone through what the next steps are, but if there's any confusion as to kind of where that lies, I would say we can discuss that now. But basically the next step are to do everything that we've talked about for the December 9th teleconference meeting, and the co-chair and I will work through with DOJ on those issues that we've discussed, including the letter to Dr. Weber and rearranging the report and including those data charts in a different area to reflect the discussion today are some of the highlights of those next steps moving forward. So I'd like to just turn to my co-chair and see if she has any additional comments.
No.
Any additional comments by DOJ or any clarification that you need?
Just, I want to thank everyone very much for the discussion, the debate, your leadership on these issues. You all obviously care quite a bit about the content and what the report looks like, and I just want to say thank you for all of your assistance. And now I'm going to ask, I am concerned that because we did not get to a consensus point here, that we have enough people at the December 9th meeting to have a quorum. And so I'm just hoping that for those who don't have pre-planned vacations, please commit. We have the teleconference locations, which hopefully will make it less of a lift. We have teleconference locations in Sacramento at our 4949 Broadway address. I just want to make sure that's clear because we do have multiple locations. It will be here in Oakland, Los Angeles. Sheriff Robinson's hosting a location at Kings County Sheriff's Office. Chief Swing will have a location in Morgan Hill. Andrea Guerrero will have one at Alliance San Diego. And LaWanda will be hosting in Gardena at Detours Mentoring Group. So there are several locations. We will work our best to ensure that all board members can make it. We have to have, just so that everyone knows, the public has to be able to come to every location where a board member is physically. So we cannot have board members calling in from their vacations in Hawaii or New York or wherever you're going. So I apologize for that, but that is what the law requires.
And Nancy, just real quick on those teleconference location, what is DOJ's deadline on publishing those? What's the
So
time
we
frame?
had to publish those 2 months ago.
That's what I
So
thought.
they were set in stone a long time ago. We always ensure folks, we check with everyone. We're constantly in communication, asking who would like to host those locations.
Very good.
I also was remiss in noting earlier that Reverend Ben McBride has resigned from the board due to the fact that he will not be able to make any of the board meetings for the remainder of the year due to his travel schedule. His term is set to expire this year anyway, so we are actively looking for replacements. And so it is going to be, that's another reason why I'm concerned, because we're down 3 board members right now. And so, everyone's vote counts at this point.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Is the schedule the same for the 9th meeting, the 10 o'clock start?
Yes, 10 a.m. start, and it is going to be video conference or teleconference.
Okay. Any additional questions or comments from the board members? No. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll adjourn the meeting at 2:05. Thank you.